But just to start out, does anyone have any questions about any of the intricacies of it? Or any concerns?
How long have you guys been working on this?
The organization, Rescue California Education Foundation, has been around for about 2 years. This particular initiative has been around for, I think, written as is, probably 6 months-ish. And we submitted it to the Attorney General about a month and a half ago, and then just recently got the Legislative Analyst Office report, which is a score of how much it would cost the state of California and addresses other issues. And then yesterday, I believe, we got permission from the Attorney General to start gathering signatures, so it got covered in LA Times and a few other media outlets.
Does this require constitutional change?
Yes, this is a constitutional amendment. The initiative itself is very short, it's about 4 pages. You can find it on our website at neighborhoodlegislature.com or the Attorney General's website. But because it's a constitutional amendment, it does require more signatures, about 830,000 signatures we're going to need. And the reason it has to be a constitutional amendment is because it is changing what our California Constitution said back in 1880. That's when we initially decided that we have 80 assemblymen and 40 state senators. We just haven't adjusted over all that time. Meanwhile, the U.S. House of Representatives, for example, they started out as 1 member for every 40,000 people, and they adjusted about 3 times over our country's history as our population grew. Granted, they haven't recently, and they're way behind what a lot of founding fathers anticipated. I think Alexander Hamilton expected it to be like 800 people in our House of Representatives by like 1820. He was way off. But this is California's unique method of actually changing that when our legislators won't, because it's hard for them to willingly decide one day, you know what, I think my district's too large, I think it's too hard to contact my constituents, let me reduce my power and prestige a little bit. But it's gotten really bad. I mean, as I mentioned, ours is the worst in the country in terms of size. I don't know what your experience is talking with state senators or state assemblymen, but for me it's hard to get past maybe an intern, maybe at best to get a response from an intern or an email. Whereas my board supervisor, I don't agree with him on virtually anything, but fresh out of high school, he was more than happy to sit down with me, let me record him, ask him questions, because he knows that I can get him out of office if he's doing a bad job. Similarly, I live in rural Solano County, so I don't actually live in a city, but one of the Dixon City councilmen, even I've known him a few miles from his district, more than happy to talk to me, because again, he knows that bad press for me can get him out of office. And that's what's really important about this. So if we have a district of 5,000 people, and only about 20% of people in the district actually vote, we're talking about 1,000 people, 2 people run, and we got to convince 500 people that you're the right candidate. That's what really changes the campaign. Whereas right now, everything's a 30-second ad, a mailer, there's some sort of barrier between you and your representative. This makes it so that your representative goes door to door, asks you how you feel about issues, asks you how about the problems in the community you think need to be addressed. And they can give out their cell phone number, they can stay in constant contact with you, because it's not overwhelming to be in contact with a few hundred people, whereas it is overwhelming to be in contact with 500,000 people. I mean, running for state senate in California is like running for governor of North and South Dakota at the same time. It's unworkable for a legislative district. So we'll still have large districts. It's going to solve the problem entirely. I mean, we're going to have board of equalization districts that are going to be about 5 people across the state. Governor's still going to be a giant race. Attorney General is still going to be a giant race. But what's important is this will give the people a check to have access to their government, to their state representatives, in a way that we haven't had in California in over 100 years, and in a way that these other states do have, and most of the country, frankly, has by comparison to us. The average nationwide is 1 for every 50,000. But the reason we chose these numbers specifically is this is where you really start to see the money come out of these races. I'm sorry if I went a little bit of tangent there on your question. But I answered it though, right?
Yes. How are you going to combat all these districts?
The initiative explicitly states we're going to have the same citizens redistricting commission that just drew the new districts come in and draw 100 mini districts in all those same districts.
What about pushback? Have you got any pushback yet on this?
The most pushback we get is from lobbyists. They do not seem to like the idea. We've had a few take us aside and say, well, we think it's a good idea, but there's no way our membership will get behind it. But that's really what we want. That's the whole idea behind it. It makes their job harder, because now instead of lobbying 120 people, they have to lobby 12,000 people. And instead of being on a higher level in terms of access, because they know the legislators need their money, they're going to be the same level as all of us. Because if you only need $700 to win a race, you're not going to care about someone trying to say, you should have this position, that way my organization will give you a $1,000 check. You're going to say, well, I don't care. All I need to do is go door to door to win my race. I don't need a bunch of money and mailers to win my race. So their opposition is actually a good thing as far as we're concerned. We believe that constituents should be the lobbyists. You should be able to lobby your representative about issues you care about. You shouldn't have to only hope that some large body is going to do that for you. I mean, it's gotten really bad. One example, I like it because it's nonpartisan on both sides, shows the power of special interest. You know, because when I say special interest, some people say, well, your special interest, that might be my important interest. But the Disclose Act in 2010, that was an act that was going to require the super PAC donors to list the top donors on ads. But regardless of how you feel about the substance of that legislation, what was interesting is that right when they were writing it, they started carving out exemptions for large organizations. So they immediately carved out exemptions for a few unions, but not the other thousands of unions out there that were smaller. So then on the right, they carved out exemption for the NRA, but not for Gun Owners of America, not for Cal Guns or any other gun groups. So these special interest organizations are so powerful, actually able to get exemptions for themselves into law that has nothing to do with the issues that they advocate. And these type of problems wouldn't happen, or at least much less frequent, if the districts were so small that you weren't worried about getting those thousands of dollars of checks. And that's why I brought up the cost it takes to run in California. I mean, $700,000, that's an incredible amount of money you have to raise to run here. So it really changes the type of people that run, because you have to give up your entire professional and personal life to run. And you have to spend, you have to be independently wealthy, or to spend all your time fundraising. I mean, breakfast, lunch, dinner, that's what these people do all the time. Because you have to, otherwise you're not going to have the money it takes, the war chest, to run in a massive district. You can never be too specific about fixing problems, because if you are, you're going to alienate a bunch of special interests who will then throw a bunch of money at your district to make sure that you never are in office again. But in small districts, they don't seem to have that problem as much. Our state here is doing people we can, in a sense, a lot more than a lot of other states in terms of financial liabilities. Pensions, for example, great thing. We should have pensions for people. But the state has been promising our state employees that they'd be setting aside money for their pensions, and just haven't been. And the state, Stanford recently did a study that found they have a $300 billion pension liability as a result of that. It's a major problem, but they don't want to address it because they know that in order to do that, they would have to be spending money on that rather than other special interest programs which they get money for so that they can have their power. So it creates this endless cycle where they have to lobby for money to stay in power, and lobbying for money means that they're supporting special programs that aren't really helping us.
So this is going before the voters?
Yes, this will be going through the initiative process. Will be on the ballot in 2014 or November.
How do you see, if you start carving up into those small districts, what do you see happening possibly as a result of that in terms of the Republican or Democrat or independent? Would that change a lot in terms of how many people will be elected as a result of that?
Well, the parties will still exist, so there will still be Republicans, Democrats running. There will probably be some third parties that are able to get on the ballot as well. Some counties and cities tend to be a little more third party oriented, like City of Cotati, for example, up in Sonoma County. I think they're controlled by Peace and Freedom for a decade. They might have elected a Peace and Freedom candidate. Oakland, I think, at one point elected a Green Party member during a special election. When they're a small district, they might do the same thing. But what's really important is they're not as partisan. They tend to, these other states, there's a Rose Institute report, like I mentioned earlier, about 100 pages long. They tend to have coalitions on issues rather than feeling boxed into one party or another. And they're a lot less partisan in their actions. So like New Hampshire, for example, their lower house is 400 people, about the same size as U.S. House of Representatives, 435. But they're much less partisan on U.S. House of Representatives because they're able to talk on individual issues on a local level with their constituents and come to agreements in a way that you can't do when you represent 700,000 people, I forget what exactly it is for the U.S. House of Representatives. So yes, the parties will still exist, but they're not going to be as important. People will be able to get out of the box more a little bit, because right now you have to kind of conform to the Republican or Democratic mold, otherwise you're missing out on all the state media attention, all the national media attention, and you kind of alienate yourself in a way that doesn't happen in these other states.
The flyer that you handed out, it's paid for by Committee for Neighborhood Legislature Reform Act, major funding by John Cox. Are you familiar with who John Cox is?
Yes.
What is motivation for this?
Yes, bottom right of all these flyers is major funder John Cox. John Cox is an attorney. He owns a law firm in Illinois. He owns several apartment complexes in Indiana. He ran for president on the Republican ticket in 2008. But this initiative is nonpartisan. It's these states with small districts, some are very Democrat, some are Republican, most are more in the middle. But he was only in one debate, so I hadn't heard of him before this. But as I said, the initiative itself is very nonpartisan. He tells me that the reason he thinks it's a good idea is because when he was running in New Hampshire, he saw one of these town halls with 5 candidates running for a small district. And he's just shocked about how specific they were about their policies and how engaged they were for such a small district. He thought it'd be a good idea here. But, I suspect maybe 10 years from now, he might want to put this on his resume and say, I was the guy that helped get small districts in California. But he has no business interest here. He doesn't live in San Diego. But I really believe that his main concern is just making government better. I think he felt kind of cheated out of the process. He was the only candidate who spent $25,000 in South Carolina to be on the ballot that wasn't in the debate on Fox News.
All right, Gerald, thank you.